Let's start with the economic impact. China is ground zero. China is ground zero, meaning their economy has ground to a halt. Governments, the Chinese Communist Party had estimated that the Chinese economy would grow 6% in 2020, this year. Right now, the government is estimating it may be below 4% before this is all through. Now that's pretty bad. Keep in mind that they may be over-reporting those numbers, and if you listen to people like Gordon Chang, who we had on this program, they may be deeply in recession right now. Now I need you to understand something else. There's $6 trillion of Chinese bank loans inside their country that would be at or near default if growth is less than 4%. And we don't take that from our statistics. That is from a Chinese central bank stress test. The People's Bank of China did a stress test on all their banks, and they found that if growth was less than 4%, it would put $6 trillion worth of loans at risk. The truth is the economy may be in recession, it could be negative, and this has an existential threat for the Chinese Communist Party. Now I want to read to you from Zero Hedge. This is a report they put out earlier this month, and it says, China's banks face $6 trillion coronavirus cataclysm if epidemic is not contained soon. Here's a quote. In a little notice post back in November, we reported that as part of a stress test conducted by China's central bank in the first half of 2019, 30 medium and large-sized banks were tested. In the base case scenario, assuming GDP growth dropped to 5.3%, 9 out of the 30 major banks failed and saw their capital adequacy ratios drop to 13.47% from 14.43%. Let me put that in translation to you in plain English. If their economy drops below 5.3%, 9 banks are in serious trouble. Then they said, in the worst case scenario, assuming GDP dropped to 4.15%, 2% below the official GDP print, more than half of China's banks, or 17 out of the 30 banks, failed the test. That means that even if you take the government's estimates and you believe that economic growth will be as high as 4% this year, more than half of their banks are teetering on the edge. Now, of course, China can jump in with stimulus. They can jump in and try and save these banks. But $6 trillion is an enormous amount of potential bad loans. Now let me give you the economic impact of the threat. This is from Bloomberg on February 22nd. Despite accounting for 60% of the economy and 80% of the jobs in China, private businesses have long struggled to tap funding to help them expand during booms and survive crises. About 2/3 of the country's 80 million small businesses, including many mom-and-pop shops, lacked access to loans as of 2018. If China fails to contain the virus in the first quarter, I expect a vast number of small businesses would go under. That's a quote from the Bloomberg report. So this could have knock-on effects for China's economy for quite some time. But it's not just China. There are also supply chain impacts. Now keep in mind, over the past 2 decades, the Chinese have begged us to transfer our supply chains to them. They said, we'll lower your cost and we can get that to you efficiently. We'll improve the quality. They made all these promises, and so many American businesses did just that, so that we depend, when we make American products, we depend on Chinese parts and goods to be part of that. It's part of the just-in-time inventory, so we don't keep a lot of inventory on the shelf. Now, we've warned about this in our show. We've talked about it repeatedly in the Economic War Room. President Trump's trade war, fortunately, has actually helped prepare some businesses who have sought alternative suppliers outside of China, but it's still going to have an enormous impact. This is true for strategic materials, it's true for consumer goods, and it's particularly true for medicines, and we'll talk about that in a bit. This is why Apple issued an earnings warning just a couple of weeks ago that hit their stock and said, hey, if we can't get what we need from China, we won't sell as many iPhones and Apple TVs and computers as we were hoping. That hit Apple. It's also hit other major U.S. companies that depend on China. Now, I want to read another report from Bloomberg that happened last week. The virus is interrupting supply chains from watches to lobsters. Bloomberg. A Hong Kong watchmaker who can't get coils or wheels. New Zealand lobsters released back into the wild. A San Diego game studio facing delays to its latest fantasy board games. The coronavirus outbreak has hobbled China's economy, and it's increasingly ricocheting throughout the world economy and supply chains.